Hi everyone, Paul here from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family. And if I asked you to name 3 or 4 luxury midsize sedans, you might rattle off quickly the Audi A6, the BMW 5 Series, the Mercedes E-Class, but perhaps not the Lexus GS. It's a car that often gets overlooked by people who are shopping around in this segment because it doesn't have quite as much cachet as some of those other competitors on the market. But you really should consider this car because since 1993, it has been a reliable, solid, really well-built option in this segment. We're in the 4th generation of the GS now. It came out in 2011. It had a facelift in 2016. And for this year, just a couple of minor changes, including the introduction of this smoky granite mica color in our test vehicle, which I really like. And we also have Lexus safety system features, so lane keeping assist, adaptive cruise control, forward collision mitigation braking, auto high beams. It's a nice package to have and really cool that we're getting that on all trims now of the GS. Now what's interesting here is that Lexus actually offers up 2 vehicles in the mid-size luxury sedan segment. There's the ES, which starts at about $43,000, and then there's the GS here, which starts at about $58,000. But is that extra $15,000 worth it? This car has beautiful fit and finish. It does drive quite nicely. Let's hop on board and see how the GS stacks up this week on Family Wheels. Well, before you ever step foot in the GS, this car strikes a much more athletic, much more aggressive stance than the ES, which in my mind is a fairly conservative, kind of bland-looking Lexus sedan. But that's for good reason, because the GS is by far the more powerful, the more sport-minded of the 2 vehicles. You get the same 3.5-liter V6 engine on board, regardless of the trim that you choose here in the GS 350. You also get all-wheel drive standard. Now that's different to what you see down in the States, where you can get a smaller turbo on board this car with rear-wheel drive. Not an option up here, but I think that smaller turbo would probably make this car feel rather underpowered, and it's nice given our winters that we get all-wheel drive in all versions of the GS 350. Now if you're looking for a really crazy version of this car for performance, you can always go to the GS F, which is a $100,000 sport-tuned, sport-minded sedan. That's not what we're looking at this week, but this 311 horsepower 3.5-liter V6 does deliver a nice, steady, cruising kind of power. It doesn't feel like a really tensed up race machine, but you still never feel like you're lacking in power when you go to step on it, you're passing someone on the highway or you're in a steeper grade or something like that. Now there is one way to get a rear-wheel drive GS up here in Canada, and that's if you go to the GS 450H. That's the hybrid version of this car, and you only can get that with rear-wheel drive, which is kind of a bit of a downside in my opinion, but it does offer best-in-class fuel efficiency. Lexus saying you should see between about 7 to 8 liters per 100 kilometers in that hybrid version of this car. That's really impressive, especially when you consider that hybrid car still has, again according to Lexus, a 0 to 100 kilometer an hour time of 5.6 seconds. Don't expect that same kind of fuel efficiency out of this regular GS 350 though. I'm actually pretty underwhelmed by what I've seen here this week. Generally I'm able to actually get numbers that are a little lower than the companies suggest, but this week I'm averaging 12.6 liters per 100 kilometers. That is thirsty, and that puts us above Lexus's recommendations for the average that you should see in the city. We compare this to that Lincoln MKZ that I was in back in the fall, another mid-size luxury sedan with a twin-turbo 400 horsepower engine on board our tester. That's an option, but man was it a sporty car. That car we averaged 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers, even though it had a lot more life to it than what we're driving around here today. But don't get me wrong, this car is still really fun to drive, particularly with this F Sport Series 2 package that I'm driving around here this week. That adds about an extra $10,000 to the base price tag, but one of the things that you're getting with this package, as well as in the executive package, which costs just a little bit more than this F Sport package, and is meant to be a bit more of a comfort-focused package rather than a sporty package like we're in here this week, but both of them offer what's called adaptive variable suspension, and it means that for a larger sedan like this, it corners really nicely, and the standard paddle shifters here on the steering wheel control the 6-speed automatic transmission. The shifts are crisp and quick, and it means that you can corner with these paddle shifters and have a lot more fun than I was expecting with this car. One thing I really like about the way this car has been tuned is its engine note. It's not as, aggressive and machismo as we see in a lot of other cars. The Infiniti line of vehicles has very sort of loud, look at me kind of exhaust notes. This is more subtle than that, but it's subtly addictive, and it lets you know that there is a lot of power behind this car. I've been enjoying it all week. Another thing that I really like here in the GS is its steering feel, but it's not going to be for everyone. As soon as I started driving this car, I noticed right away that it is weighted fairly heavily, more like kind of a sport-oriented vehicle. If you're the kind of person who likes a more soft steering feel, doesn't require quite so much effort, make sure to take this car around, a few parking lots. Really get a feel for whether this is going to be something that's for you or whether that's going to drive you crazy. But one thing I could do without in the GS, when you look at, again, those F Sport and Executive trims, you get 19-inch rims with low-profile, more sport-oriented tires. It looks cool from the outside, but ultimately this car, to me, is more about comfort and cruising than it is about, performance. And these low-profile tires mean that I'm feeling a lot more of the bumps on the road than I expected. They also make this car a little bit noisier than I expected it to be. Lexus, prides itself on having a fairly quiet, refined ride, but I feel like I'm hearing a little bit more wind noise through the door seals than I'd hoped. Our decibel reader is still pretty good. At 100 kilometers an hour, we averaged 61 decibels here this week. That definitely puts it on the quieter end of cars that I tested, but there are things that could improve that and make it even better. That aside, the interior on the GS is really nicely executed. Lexus is known for not being shy about dolloping on high-end materials, soft touch surfaces all through its cabins, and the GS is no exception. Really nice standard equipment in this car too. At that base price of $58,200, you're getting LED headlamps up front, really nice headlights from Lexus here, great for nighttime driving. You're getting all of those safety features I already mentioned. Lexus is pushing hard, Toyota too for that matter, to make this equipment far more standard on even its more basic vehicles. The Corolla has it for 2017, so that's really cool. Speaking of safety, nice to have all-wheel drive standard here in Canada. Once we hop inside, we have a heated steering wheel, we have heated front seats, we have 10-way adjustable front seats as well. Here on this F Sport package, I have 16-way adjustable seats, and while the backrest is really supportive and gives you lots of options in terms of getting things just so, it's not so great when it comes to where your butt is actually sitting. It's just not particularly supportive. It feels just a little bit flat-bottomed. I've complained about this before with other Lexus vehicles. We compare this to what in my opinion is the gold standard, the Volvo brand of vehicles. That's our daily driver, and this just doesn't quite stack up. But elsewhere here on the interior of the GS is this massive 12.3-inch infotainment system screen. It's the largest in this segment in terms of size. It's got excellent clarity. You've got a rear backup camera and navigation pumping through it as standard as well. I had smaller televisions than this when I was growing up in our living room. This thing's pretty impressive, but I do have a couple of issues with it. First up is the interface. You use this mouse-style clicker. It's just not particularly easy to use, and I know that I've heard from other people who've written before and said, yeah, it just takes a bit getting used to, but I've been in a lot of Lexus vehicles at this point, and I still don't particularly like it, and right across the industry, it's widely panned as one of the least intuitive systems out there for scrolling through menus. Another issue that I have with Lexus and Toyota vehicles, because they're really lagging behind on this front, is that we still don't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. I know that Toyota is working on its own proprietary system, but for now it means that they look like they're really dragging behind on this front, and it's something that's becoming really important to people who want that smartphone compatibility with their infotainment systems. In general, a really nicely executed interior here on the GS, but a couple of little things that I'd like to see improved upon. First up, I'd love to see a full-size panorama sunroof as an option as part of that F Sport or Executive package. Those are really expensive packages. I've talked about that before with other Lexus reviews. You get a lot, but it's still at over $10,000. I feel like a panorama sunroof would be a good addition. Another thing, and it's just a little tiny thing, but it seems to go against standard, sort of Lexus quality on the interior. When I look at this little flap that covers up the cup holders, there's this lip and gap when that flap is down that seems out of place for a Lexus. And once you lift this flap up and you go to, access the heated or ventilated seat buttons in the front seats, they're blocked. They're not as easy to access. Something that just seemed, it's a little thing. It's like one of those rocks in the bottom of your shoe. But if I owned this car, that would get to me over time. Well, I gotta say, I'm a bit disappointed here sitting in the second row of the GS. I was expecting it to be a bit more spacious. I'm just about maxed out for headroom at 6'2". Any bumps, I'm gonna be hitting the roof liner. And then also with the driver's seat positioned at about a 6 foot tall driver, my legroom is totally maxed out too. Something that really bugs me about this car, and I'm seeing it in a lot of other vehicles these days too, is that when the driver turns off the ignition up front, this driver's seat comes sliding back, and what makes an already very tight second row even tighter. And unlike in, say, that Ford Mustang that I was testing last year, where it senses a passenger's legs back here and backs off so they don't get totally squeezed in, you don't have that here in the GS. So it's coming back, whether you've got somebody sitting behind you in the driver's seat or not. When we look at this compared to that ES sedan that I tested a couple of years ago from Lexus, it's also a mid-size sedan, and from the outside, that ES actually, to me, looks like a slightly smaller vehicle. But once you step inside here into the second row, this actually has quite a bit less legroom. We look at the numbers, and this has 36.8 inches of rear legroom for rear passengers, while the ES has about 40 inches of legroom. That's a big difference. Another thing that bugs me about the GS is that while it does have 5 seatbelts on board, you might as well call this a 4-passenger vehicle, because this great big hump here in the middle seat section in the second row is so big that even small kids are going to have a hard time fitting into this middle seat. Now, speaking of young kids, front-facing car seats haven't been a problem for us this week. Even for me as a tall adult, I've been able to have my seat back far enough where I've been comfortable, and yet there's enough room for Roger to, kick his legs back here in his front-facing car seat. Flip this car seat around to rear-facing mode, though, and it is a little bit tighter with our new metric measuring from the back of the front passenger seat cushion up to the front of the glove box. We're seeing about 28 inches, but there's a great big bulge in the glove box, which means that my shins are still, my knees digging right into that glove box. I've got enough headroom, but my legroom is really maxed out. Now, you can get this car with that executive package that spruces up the back seat just that little bit more with a heated rear seat and also a third zone of climate control. You also get a higher level of leather in the executive package, but regardless of the trim that you choose, you're getting these pinhole perforations here in the back seat. I've talked about them before. They're a real issue to clean up if you've got families and they're spilling things back here. Checking out the trunk now here on the GS, higher level trims of this car come with an electronically assisted trunk lift. That means that if you've got an armful of groceries or whatever, this button here on the key fob, it's going to open really easily, although it is a little slow to open. You can check that out. It takes a little longer than I'd like. Once we get into this trunk, 520 liters of capacity back there makes it one of the larger sedan trunks that we've tested recently. You can fit all of our standardized trunk tests back there with lots of room to spare, and nice and deep too, so longer items can fit back there pretty easily. Now, speaking of longer items, if you do have a pair of skis, you're off to the mountains, Lexus does have a small pass-through that does go through that middle seat. I tried that in the Lexus IS a couple of months ago, and I wasn't able to fit 2 pairs of skis through that pass-through. Just something to keep in mind. You might have to wind up going with a ski box or something if you're going to be using this as a car to get out into the mountain. Well, quite simply put, if you're looking for a fuel-efficient car that offers great, sumptuous second-row legroom, this isn't it. But if it's all about the driver experience for you, and you want something that's a classic touring car that still corners beautifully and has a nice, steady delivery of power, the GS could be worth looking at. It has excellent reliability, as all Lexus vehicles do, and it's been nicely finished here on the interior. But you know what? If it were my money, I think I would probably go for the base trim on the GS, because you get great standard equipment. All those safety systems are now included as of 2017 on all trims, and you're avoiding these low-profile, high-performance tires, which I just don't think jive with what this car is all about. But I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the GS, which package you're looking at. Maybe you're already cross-shopping this with some of the European competitors that this car has. How do you think it stacks up? Leave a comment below, subscribe while you're at it, and then check out familywheels.ca where I put together a full report card on the GS.